During the division of my husband's inheritance, my daughter said, "Let the adults handle this, Mom. You never knew how to manage assets." I signed the papers in silence. She didn't know there was only one legal heir. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and comment the city you're watching from. Let the adults handle this, Mom. You never knew how to deal with assets. Isabella's words cut through me like a knife as I sat in the lawyer's office, clutching my purse on my lap. At 72, I had expected many things in my life, but not this, not being dismissed by my own daughter as if I were a child. The lawyer, Mr. Peterson, glanced at me with barely concealed pity. I hated that look. I'd been seeing it ever since Richard passed away 3 months ago, as if I were some helpless old woman who couldn't possibly understand what was happening around her. "Mrs. Wilson, we just need your signature on these documents," Mr. Peterson said, sliding the papers toward me. "They authorize the transfer of assets according to the will reading we had last week." I nodded silently, my hand trembling slightly as I reached for the pen. Isabella sighed dramatically beside me, checking her watch for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. "I have a lunch meeting at 1. Can we please hurry this along?" she said, not to me, but to Mr. Peterson, as if I weren't even in the room. "Just a moment, Isabella," I said softly. "I'd like to read what I'm signing." She rolled her eyes, the gesture so reminiscent of her teenage years that for a moment I was transported back in time. Back when the distance between us wasn't quite so vast. "Seriously, Mom? It's exactly what we discussed. You get the house and your pension, and I handle Dad's business interests and investments. It's not like you'd know what to do with them anyway." The room felt suddenly too warm, too small. I looked down at the papers, the legal jargon swimming before my eyes. This wasn't what Richard and I had planned. This wasn't what he had told me during those final days, when he'd held my hand and made me promise to be strong. "Your father and I were married for 47 years, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Do you really think we never discussed his wishes?" Isabella's perfectly manicured hand landed on top of mine. "Mom, Dad protected you from all this for a reason. Finance stressed you out, remember? Remember how you used to mix up the checking and savings accounts? How Dad had to take over the bills after you paid the same one twice? Those incidents were from 30 years ago, when I was juggling a part-time job and caring for Isabella and her brother Michael after he was diagnosed with leukemia. The years we lost Michael were the hardest of my life, and yes, I'd made mistakes. Small ones. Human ones. But Isabella had crafted those moments into a narrative of incompetence that she'd been telling for years. Mr. Peterson cleared his throat. "Perhaps Mrs. Wilson would like some time to review the documents?" "There's no need," Isabella cut in. "We've been over all this. Mom just gets confused sometimes." I wasn't confused. Not anymore. Not about what mattered. I signed the papers, my signature surprisingly steady. Isabella didn't know that these weren't the final documents. She didn't know about my private meeting with Mr. Peterson last week, or about the actual will that Richard had created just 2 months before his death. She didn't know that there was only one legal heir to Richard's estate. As I placed the pen down, Isabella was already standing up, collecting her designer handbag. "Perfect. I'll call you tonight to check in, Mom." She leaned down to kiss my cheek, the scent of her expensive perfume momentarily overwhelming. "Try to get some rest. You look tired." I watched her walk out, tall and confident in her tailored suit, every bit the successful businesswoman. So much like her father in ambition, so little like him in heart. Mr. Peterson waited until the door closed behind her. "Are you sure about this, Mrs. Wilson?" he asked quietly. "We could have told her today." I shook my head, gathering my purse and the small photo of Richard I always carried with me. "Not yet," I said. "There's something I need to do first." As I stepped out of the office into the bright September sunshine, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. For decades I had lived in the shadow of others' perceptions. Richard's devoted wife, Michael's grieving mother, Isabella's incompetent burden. But Richard had known the truth. In those final months as cancer slowly claimed him, we'd had conversations deeper than any in our long marriage. He'd seen what I'd tried to hide for years, the way Isabella dismissed me, the way she'd positioned herself between us, the way she measured everything in dollars and status. "She never knew you, Debbie," he'd whispered one night. "Not the real you. Maybe it's time she did." I walked slowly to my car, remembering the weight of his hand in mine when he made me promise not to let Isabella steamroll me after he was gone. I had made that promise, and Deborah Wilson always kept her promises. The real battle was just beginning. The house was too quiet when I returned that afternoon. 47 years in the same colonial home, and I still wasn't used to the silence that had settled in after Richard's passing. I placed my keys in the small dish by the door, a pottery piece Isabella had made in 3rd grade, before she decided art wasn't prestigious enough to pursue. I moved to the kitchen and made myself a cup of tea, an automatic routine that brought small comfort. As I waited for the kettle to boil, my eyes drifted to the dining room where Richard and I had shared thousands of meals, where we'd made plans, celebrated victories, and weathered disappointments. Where 6 months ago he told me the truth about our financial situation. "We're not just comfortable, Debbie," he had said, spreading papers across the oak table. "We're wealthy. Very wealthy." I remembered how I'd stared at him, confused. We lived well, certainly, a nice home in a good neighborhood, regular vacations, no concerns about retirement. But the figures he showed me that day were staggering. "Why are you telling me this now?" I'd asked. His eyes, already hollowed by the cancer that was consuming him, had held mine steadily. "Because I've kept you in the dark too long. Because Isabella has the wrong idea about everything. And because I need your help to fix my mistakes." The kettle's whistle pulled me back to the present. I poured the hot water over the tea bag and carried the mug to Richard's study, a room I'd rarely entered during his life but had found myself drawn to since his death. The leather chair creaked as I sat behind his desk. I ran my fingers over the polished wood, remembering how different Richard had been in those final months. More vulnerable, more honest. "I never meant to sideline you," he'd confessed one evening, his voice weak but determined. "It started as protection. You were so broken after Michael died. I wanted to shoulder all the burdens. But then it became habit. And then Isabella started treating you like you were helpless and I let her." I opened the bottom drawer of the desk, removing a leather-bound journal. Richard's private record of our life together. He'd given it to me the week before he died. "Read it," he'd said. "Understand. And then decide what to do." I'd been reading it bit by bit, unable to process too much at once. Today, I turned to the entries from 20 years ago, when Isabella graduated from college and joined Richard's investment firm. May 15, 2003. Isabella's first day at Wilson Investments. So proud to see her at the office, though I worry she sees this as her birthright, rather than an opportunity to learn. When I suggested she start in client services to understand the business from the ground up, she reminded me that her business degree qualifies her for management. Debbie would have told her to earn her place, but I gave in, already regretting it. I sipped my tea, remembering that time. Isabella had moved back home temporarily after graduation, filling the house with her whirlwind energy and constant phone calls. She treated me like the housekeeper, expecting meals and laundry service while she focused on important things with Richard. I flipped forward a few years. November 3, 2006. Isabella brought her new boyfriend James to dinner. Ambitious young man, works in corporate law. Something about him doesn't sit right with me. He and Isabella spent the entire meal talking about wealth management and networking opportunities, barely acknowledging Debbie despite her efforts to engage them. When Debbie mentioned her volunteer work at the Children's Hospital, Isabella actually rolled her eyes and changed the subject. I should have said something. Why didn't I say something? The familiar ache of those years washed over me. Isabella and James had married the following year. A lavish affair that felt more like a networking event than a wedding. They'd bought a house in the exclusive Oakwood neighborhood, and Isabella had become increasingly dismissive of our modest lifestyle and my small interests. What she never knew, what Richard had never told her, was that her father had quietly funded her down payment, her luxury car, even her designer wardrobe, all while letting her believe she'd earned it all herself. I continued reading, page after page, documenting Richard's growing concern about Isabella's sense of entitlement, her dismissive treatment of staff at the company, her constant pushing for riskier investments with higher returns. And then I reached the entry that changed everything. February 12, 2023. The oncologist confirmed today what I already suspected. 6 months, maybe less. I haven't told Debbie or Isabella yet. First, I need to put things in order. I've watched Isabella these past years, hoping she would develop the character to responsibly handle the wealth she expects to inherit. She hasn't. All she sees is money and status. She doesn't understand that true wealth lies in how you treat people, not what you own. I've made a decision. I'm changing my will. Everything goes to Debbie. She has the wisdom and heart to manage it properly, even if she doesn't know it yet. Isabella will be furious, but maybe it will finally teach her the lesson I failed to impart, that character matters more than cleverness, and kindness more than ambition. Debbie will doubt herself. She's believed Isabella's narrative for too long, that she's financially inept, that she needs protection and guidance. I need to help her see the strength I've always seen in her, the strength that carried us through losing Michael, the strength that forgave me when I wasn't the partner I should have been. I don't have much time left, but I can do this one thing right. I closed the journal, tears blurring my vision. In those final months, Richard had taught me everything he could about our finances, our investments, the charitable foundation he'd established in Michael's name. He'd introduced me to his most trusted advisors and shown me that I was far more capable than Isabella, or I myself had ever believed. The doorbell rang, startling me from my thoughts. I quickly returned the journal to its drawer and made my way to the front door. Isabella stood on the porch, still in her business suit, an impatient expression on her face. "Mom, we need to talk about the house," she said, brushing past me without waiting for an invitation. "James and I think it's time you consider downsizing." I closed the door quietly, steeling myself for the conversation ahead. Isabella had no idea what was coming, or that the ground beneath her perfectly polished shoes was about to shift dramatically. "Downsizing," I repeated, following Isabella into my own living room. It was remarkable how she could make me feel like a visitor in the house I'd called home for nearly 5 decades. "It's the sensible option, Mom." Isabella perched on the edge of the sofa, her posture perfect as always. "This place is too big for you now. The stairs, the maintenance. It's a lot for someone your age." I sat in Richard's favorite armchair, running my fingers along the worn fabric. "I managed just fine." Isabella's smile was patronizing. "For now, sure. But we need to think ahead. James found a lovely condo in Oak Ridge Seniors Community. One-level living, activities, meal options, and best of all, it's only 15 minutes from our house." "How thoughtful," I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "And what about this house?" "Well, that's what I wanted to discuss." She leaned forward, her expression shifting to what I recognized as her negotiation face. "The market is excellent right now. If we sell quickly, we could get well above asking price. After covering the condo, we could invest the remainder for your care needs." By we, she meant herself, of course. Isabella had been positioning herself to control Richard's assets for years, and now she was coming for mine as well. "I see." I kept my voice neutral. "And have you and James already spoken to a realtor?" Isabella had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "We've had some preliminary discussions. Nothing concrete." I nodded slowly. "When is Mr. Peterson planning to execute the will?" "He mentioned next week. Just some final paperwork." She waved her hand dismissively. "Nothing you need to worry about." The doorbell rang again, and Isabella frowned. "Are you expecting someone?" "Actually, yes." I rose, smoothing my slacks. "That would be Mr. Peterson now." "Peterson? Why would he?" "I asked him to come by." I moved toward the door, feeling Isabella's confused stare on my back. Mr. Peterson stood on the porch, briefcase in hand, expression solemn. "Mrs. Wilson, is now still a good time?" "Perfect timing," I assured him, stepping aside to let him enter. "Isabella is here as well." He nodded, unsurprised. We had discussed this possibility. Isabella stood as we entered the living room, her confusion giving way to suspicion. "What's going on? Did something happen with the paperwork?" "Please have a seat," I said, gesturing to the couch. "Mr. Peterson has something important to discuss with us." The lawyer placed his briefcase on the coffee table, extracting a folder with practiced efficiency. "Miss Wilson, I understand you believe the documents signed earlier today finalized your father's estate distribution." Isabella's eyes narrowed. "Yes, that's right. I'm afraid those were merely preliminary papers. Mr. Peterson adjusted his glasses. The actual will execution requires additional documentation, which I've brought with me today. I don't understand. Isabella looked between us. We've been through all this already. Mr. Peterson cleared his throat. Miss Wilson, the will your father filed 6 months before his death supersedes all previous versions. In this final will, Mr. Wilson named your mother, Deborah Wilson, as his sole heir and executor of his estate. The silence that followed was absolute. I could almost hear the gears turning in Isabella's mind as she processed what she was hearing. That's impossible, she finally said, her voice dangerously quiet. Dad would never. I assure you it's entirely legal and binding. Mr. Peterson passed her a document. This is a copy of the executed will. As you can see, your father was of sound mind and body when he signed it, with 2 witnesses present. Isabella scanned the document, her face growing paler with each paragraph. This is a mistake. Or a manipulation. She looked up at me, eyes flashing. What did you do? Did you pressure him when he was sick? When he couldn't think clearly? The accusation stung, even though I'd anticipated it. Your father knew exactly what he was doing, Isabella. You had no right. She stood abruptly, the papers clutched in her trembling hand. Dad built that company from nothing. He always intended for me to take over. Everyone knows that. Richard wanted you to earn the company, not inherit it, I said quietly. There's a difference. So this is punishment? Because I didn't follow his exact career plan. Isabella's voice rose. Or is this your revenge for not visiting enough during his illness? Mr. Peterson interjected smoothly. Miss Wilson, I can assure you that your father was explicit about his wishes. He made this decision with great deliberation. Isabella wasn't listening. Her face had transformed into something I barely recognized. A mask of fury and betrayal. You won't get away with this, she hissed at me. I'll contest the will. I'll tell everyone how you manipulated a dying man. Do you think anyone will believe you could run his companies? You can barely operate your smartphone. Each word was designed to wound, to reinforce the narrative of my incompetence that she'd crafted over the years. But they didn't land as they once would have. Isabella, I said, my voice steady, your father wanted you to learn something from this. Don't you dare tell me what Dad wanted, she snapped. You've been playing the helpless widow, making everyone feel sorry for you. While all along you were plotting to take everything. She grabbed her purse, heading for the door. My lawyer will be in touch. Don't make any decisions about the company. Don't touch anything. The door slammed behind her with such force that the family photos on the wall rattled. I closed my eyes, feeling the tension drain from my shoulders, replaced by a profound sadness. Mr. Peterson placed a gentle hand on my arm. That went about as expected, I'm afraid. I nodded, moving to straighten the photos Isabella's dramatic exit had disturbed. She'll fight this. She can try, he replied. But your husband's will is ironclad. He knew exactly what he was doing. I traced the frame of my favorite photo, Richard, Isabella, and me at her college graduation. We were all smiling. A perfect family portrait that hid the fractures already forming beneath the surface. What happens now? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Now, Mr. Peterson said, returning the documents to his briefcase, we prepare for battle. That night, as news of the will spread through our social circle, my phone rang incessantly. Friends expressed concern, distant relatives voiced shock, and Isabella's friends sent thinly veiled messages of disapproval. By morning, I had become the villain in a story I hadn't written. A manipulative old woman who had stolen her daughter's birthright. But amidst the chaos, Richard's journal entries kept me anchored to the truth. This wasn't about money or power. It was about legacy, values, and one final lesson from a father who had realized too late that he had failed to teach his daughter what truly mattered. 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of legal consultations and uncomfortable silences. Isabella had made good on her threat, filing a motion to contest the will with allegations that I had exerted undue influence over Richard during his illness. Her lawyer, not James but a sharp-eyed woman with a reputation for ruthlessness, had sent a formal letter demanding access to all of Richard's medical records and personal correspondence. My quiet life had been upended. Neighbors who had brought casseroles after Richard's funeral now averted their eyes when I collected the mail. I'd overheard whispers at the grocery store, caught fragments of conversations that ceased abruptly when I approached. Did you hear about Richard Wilson's widow? Apparently, she manipulated the will. Isabella is devastated. Her father always wanted her to run the company. They say the mother never worked a day in her life, and now she thinks she can take over a multi-million-dollar business. I endured it all with outward composure, though each night I found myself talking to Richard's photograph, seeking guidance from a man who was no longer there to give it. They're making me out to be some kind of villain, I told his smiling image. Your precious daughter has half the town convinced I brainwashed you. The doorbell rang, interrupting my one-sided conversation. I checked the time, nearly 8 p.m., and approached the door cautiously. These days I never knew what to expect. Isabella stood on the porch alone. No lawyer, no James. Her appearance startled me. Her usually immaculate hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. May I come in? She asked, her voice lacking its usual sharp edge. I stepped aside, wary but curious. Would you like some tea? She shook her head, moving into the living room with none of her usual confident stride. I think we need something stronger than tea for this conversation. I raised an eyebrow but went to the cabinet where Richard had kept his good scotch. I poured 2 glasses, handing one to Isabella before taking a seat across from her. She took a long sip, grimacing slightly. You know, Dad tried to get me to appreciate scotch for years. I always pretended to like it. I know, I said quietly. He knew too. A hint of surprise flickered across her face before she composed herself. My lawyer says this will be messy, she said finally. A public fight. Expensive. Potentially damaging to the company. I nodded. Mr. Peterson said the same. We could avoid all that. Isabella set her glass down carefully. I have a proposal. Of course she did. Isabella never entered a room without a strategy. I'm listening, I said. She leaned forward, her posture shifting into business mode. 1 month. Give me 1 month to prove I can run the company the way Dad would have wanted. Let me show you I'm capable, that I understand his vision. And if I agree to this audition, if I succeed, if I can demonstrate that I'm the right person to take over, you transfer controlling interest to me. You keep a significant share, of course, and full financial security. But the day-to-day operations, the decision-making, those would be mine. I studied my daughter's face, searching for the trap. And if I don't think you've succeeded? Something flickered in her eyes, uncertainty perhaps. Then I'll drop the legal challenge. I'll accept whatever role you think is appropriate for me in the company. Or none at all if that's your decision. I took a slow sip of my scotch, considering. That's quite a concession. I'm not doing this for the money, she said. A defensive edge creeping into her voice. Dad's company was his legacy. Our family's legacy. I've worked there for 20 years. I've earned the right to lead it. Had she? I wondered. Or had she simply occupied space, benefiting from nepotism while believing it was merit? 1 month isn't very long to prove something so important, I observed. Then make it longer. 2 months. 3. Her composure was slipping. Whatever it takes. I set my glass down. Why this sudden change of approach, Isabella? Last week you were ready to drag me through court. She hesitated, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass. James thinks I'm making a mistake, she admitted. He says I should push forward with the legal challenge, that you'll cave eventually. Her eyes met mine. But Dad always said business disputes should be settled in boardrooms, not courtrooms. It was the first genuine thing she'd said all evening, and it gave me pause. Perhaps there was still something of Richard's wisdom in her, buried beneath years of entitlement and ambition. I'll consider your proposal, I said finally. But I have conditions of my own. She tensed visibly. What conditions? If we do this, you don't just prove yourself at the company. You move back home with me for the duration. Move back. Here. She looked around the house as if seeing it for the first time. Why? Because this isn't just about business acumen, Isabella. Your father's decision wasn't made lightly or spitefully. If you want to understand why he did what he did, You need to understand the man he was at the end of his life, not just the businessman you saw at the office. Isabella's expression hardened. That's ridiculous. I knew Dad better than anyone. Did you? I challenged gently. When was the last time you had a conversation with him that wasn't about the company or your achievements? She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again, doubt clouding her features. 1 month, I continued. You live here. We have dinner together every night. You go to work during the day, and I'll visit the office occasionally to observe. No lawyers, no James influencing your decisions. Just you proving that you're ready for the responsibility your father hesitated to give you. Isabella stood abruptly, pacing the room. That's invasive. And unnecessary. Those are my terms, I said simply. Take them or leave them. She stopped at the mantel, staring at the family photos arranged there. Her finger traced a silver frame holding a picture of her as a child, sitting on Richard's shoulders at the beach. Fine, she said finally, her voice tight. 1 month. Starting tomorrow. I nodded, surprised she had agreed so readily. I'll have Mr. Peterson draw up an agreement. Always the paperwork, she muttered, gathering her purse. At the door she paused. I'm doing this for Dad, you know. Not for you. I know, I said softly. That's exactly why it needs to be done. After she left, I returned to the living room, picking up the photo she had touched. Richard's face beamed with pride, his hands securely holding the legs of a laughing 5-year-old Isabella. So much had changed since that carefree day. I hope I'm doing the right thing, I whispered to his image. I hope this is what you meant when you said she needed to learn. The next morning, Isabella arrived with 2 large suitcases and the expression of grim determination. As I showed her to her old bedroom, largely unchanged since her college days, I wondered if this experiment would heal the rift between us or widen it beyond repair. Either way, we were about to discover what Richard had known all along. That the true measure of his legacy had nothing to do with stock portfolios or profit margins, but with the values that guided our choices when no one was watching. The first few days of our arrangement were awkward at best, hostile at worst. Isabella treated the house like a hotel, leaving early for work and returning late, barely making our agreed-upon dinners. When she was home, she was constantly on her phone, sending emails or speaking in hushed tones to colleagues, or perhaps to James, though she never mentioned him. On the 4th night, as I placed a casserole on the dining table, I finally broke the silence. This isn't going to work if you're just physically present, Isabella. She looked up from her phone, irritation flashing across her face. I'm fulfilling my part of the deal. I'm living here, I'm showing up for dinner. That's not what this month is about, and you know it. She set her phone down with deliberate care. Then what exactly do you want from me? I want you to be present. To engage. To understand why your father made the choice he did. Isabella stabbed at her food. He made a mistake. He was sick, vulnerable, and you took advantage. The accusation still stung, but I'd heard it enough times now that I could let it slide past me. Tomorrow is Saturday. No work. I'd like you to come with me somewhere. Where? Her suspicion was immediate. You'll see. The next morning, Isabella emerged from her room in designer jeans and a cashmere sweater, looking like she was headed to a casual business lunch rather than a day with her mother. I said nothing, simply handed her a travel mug of coffee and led her to my car. We drove in silence for nearly 30 minutes before she finally asked, "Are you going to tell me where we're going?" "The Children's Hospital," I replied, turning into the parking structure. Isabella stiffened beside me. "Why?" I parked the car before answering. "Because this is where your father spent every Thursday afternoon for the last 20 years of his life." Her head snapped toward me. "What are you talking about? Dad worked Thursdays. Not in the afternoons." I gathered my purse and a small gift bag from the back seat. "Come on." The hospital's volunteer coordinator, Susan, greeted me with a warm hug. "Deborah, we've missed you these past months." Her eyes shifted to Isabella. "And this must be my daughter Isabella," I confirmed. "Isabella, this is Susan Miller. She runs the volunteer program here." Susan beamed. "Your father was one of our most dedicated volunteers. The children adored him." Isabella's carefully composed expression faltered. "There must be some mistake." My father was the CEO of Wilson Investments. He didn't have time to volunteer. Susan's smile dimmed slightly. He was here every Thursday from 1 to 4, reading to the children in the oncology ward. Never missed a day, even when he became ill himself. She looked at me sympathetically. We were devastated to lose him. Isabella turned to me, confusion evident in her eyes. I simply nodded toward the elevators. Let's go up to the ward. As we walked through the brightly painted corridors of the pediatric oncology floor, Isabella grew increasingly quiet. A nurse spotted us and hurried over. Mrs. Wilson, it's so good to see you again. She noticed Isabella. Oh my goodness, you must be Michael's sister. You look just like your father. Isabella froze. You knew Michael? The nurse looked confused. Not personally, he was before my time. But your father spoke of him often. That's why he volunteered here, you know. After Michael died. I watched understanding dawn on Isabella's face. Michael had died when she was only 4, too young to fully comprehend what had happened to her brother, or how it had devastated our family. As she grew older, Michael became a faded photograph, a name rarely mentioned. Richard and I had both found it too painful to discuss him, a decision I now regretted. The nurse led us to a small reading nook with a plaque that read, "The Michael Wilson Memorial Reading Corner." A framed photo of Richard sat on a shelf, surrounded by children's books. Your father donated all these books, the nurse explained. And that fund he set up ensures we get new ones every month. Isabella's hand trembled as she reached out to touch the plaque. I didn't know, she whispered. He never told me. There's a lot he never told you, I said quietly. Or perhaps you never asked. We spent the next 2 hours in that reading corner, taking turns reading to children with 4 poles and tired eyes. Isabella was stiff at first, but by the 3rd book, something in her had softened. A small girl with no hair and a bright smile climbed into her lap, pointing excitedly at the pictures, and Isabella's professional facade cracked completely. On the drive home, she was silent again, but it was a different kind of silence, contemplative rather than defensive. That evening, she found me in Richard's study, where I was organizing his papers. Why didn't you ever tell me about Dad's volunteer work? She asked from the doorway. I looked up from the desk. Would you have believed me if I had? She didn't answer, which was answer enough. Your father was a complex man, I continued. The successful businessman everyone saw was only one part of him. After we lost Michael, he channeled his grief into 2 things: building financial security for our family, and helping other children with cancer. Isabella's eyes drifted to the photographs on the wall. Richard at company events, Richard on family vacations, Richard holding a much younger Isabella at her high school graduation. Why didn't he want me to know? She asked softly. He did. Many times. But you were always so focused on the business, on success, on what you could achieve. I set down the papers I'd been sorting. When was the last time you asked your father about anything other than work? She sank into a chair, suddenly looking very young. I thought I knew him, she said, her voice small. I thought we were the same. The next 3 weeks brought a transformation I had scarcely dared hope for. Isabella began asking questions about Richard. Not the businessman, but the father, the husband, the man who had quietly built a life of purpose beyond the boardroom. I showed her Richard's journal, letting her read selected entries. She cried when she read about Michael, about Richard's regrets, about his hopes for her that went far beyond corporate success. At the office where I now visited regularly, I watched her interact with employees in a new way. Listening more, commanding less. She started holding meetings with the company's charitable foundation, which she had previously dismissed as a tax write-off. One evening as we shared dinner, she looked up suddenly. Do you remember when I was 9, and Dad missed my dance recital? I nodded. It had been a major fight. Isabella had refused to speak to Richard for days afterward. He told me he had an emergency board meeting, she continued. But he was at the hospital with a dying child, wasn't he? Yes, I admitted. A little boy named Tyler. His parents had to work, and the nurses called your father because Tyler was asking for him. Isabella was quiet for a moment. I've been so angry at him for so long for things like that, for putting other priorities ahead of me. She pushed her food around her plate. I never considered that some of those priorities might have been more important than a dance recital. Your father wasn't perfect, I said gently. He made mistakes, especially in how he sheltered us both from certain realities. But he always tried to do what he thought was right. Isabella met my eyes directly for the first time in years. I'm beginning to understand that now. As our month together neared its end, something shifted between us. A thawing of the ice that had formed over decades of misunderstanding. We weren't mother and daughter in the warm, affectionate sense, but we were beginning to see each other clearly for perhaps the first time. And then, 3 days before our agreement was set to expire, Isabella discovered the letter. I was in the garden when Isabella found me, her face pale, her hands clutching a cream-colored envelope. "What is this?" she asked, her voice wavering. I recognized the envelope immediately. Richard's final letter to our daughter, the one I placed in his desk drawer after his death, uncertain if or when she would ever be ready to read it. "Your father wrote that the week before he died," I said, setting down my gardening shears. "He asked me to give it to you when the time was right. And you decided now is that time?" I shook my head. "I didn't leave it for you to find. But perhaps you were meant to find it anyway." Isabella sank onto the garden bench, staring at the envelope as if it might bite her. "I haven't opened it yet. Would you like some privacy?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "Stay. Please." With trembling fingers, she broke the seal and unfolded the letter. I watched her face as she read, seeing the emotions play across it. Shock, grief, understanding, and finally, a deep sadness that made her look more like her father than I'd ever noticed before. When she finished, she handed it to me silently. Though I knew I shouldn't, I read it too. "My dearest Isabella, if you're reading this, then 2 things have happened. I am gone, and your mother has determined that you're ready to hear some difficult truths. I have not been the father you deserved. I taught you how to succeed in business but failed to teach you how to succeed in life. I showed you how to acquire wealth but not how to use it wisely. I emphasized achievement over compassion, results over relationships. For these failures I am deeply sorry. When your brother died, something in me broke. I channeled my grief into building a financial fortress around our family, believing that if I made enough money, controlled enough assets, I could protect us from ever feeling that kind of pain again. It was a fool's errand. What I never told you, what I should have shared years ago, was how your mother saved me during that dark time. While I retreated into work, she showed a strength I could only marvel at. She held our family together when I couldn't. She never once complained about the long hours I worked or the emotional distance I maintained. Instead, she found purpose in helping others, volunteering at the hospital where Michael died, creating scholarships in his name, quietly building a legacy of compassion that far outshines any financial empire I've created. I've watched you follow in my footsteps, adopting my worst traits, my ambition, my single-mindedness, my tendency to measure worth in dollars and status. I've watched you dismiss your mother's quiet wisdom, mistaking her gentleness for weakness, her lack of financial knowledge for a lack of intelligence. You were wrong. I was wrong. The changes I've made to my will are not a punishment or a rejection. They are my final attempt to give you the guidance I should have provided all along. Your mother understands what truly matters in this life. She always has. It's time you learned from her, not from me. The company, the money, these things mean nothing if they don't serve a greater purpose. Your mother will ensure they do. And when you're ready, truly ready, she will know. I love you, Isabella. I always have. I hope someday you'll understand that this final decision was made not to hurt you, but to help you become the person I know you can be. With eternal love, Dad. I carefully refold the letter, blinking back tears. Richard's words were both a vindication and a burden, acknowledging my strength while placing on my shoulders the responsibility for our daughter's moral education, a task I had long ago relinquished to him. Isabella sat motionless beside me, her gaze fixed on the roses I'd been tending, Richard's favorites, which I'd kept alive through sheer determination since his passing. "All this time," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I thought I was the one who understood him. I thought we were the same." "You are like him in many ways," I replied gently. "His drive, his intelligence, his ability to see opportunities where others see obstacles. But your father changed in his final years, Isabella. He reassessed what mattered." She turned to me, her eyes rimmed with tears. Did he ever tell you? That he was proud of me? The question caught me off guard with its vulnerability. Of course he was proud of you. Your accomplishments, your determination. But not who I am, she interrupted. Not the person I've become. I couldn't lie to her, not now. He worried about you. About the values that guided your choices. About whether you understood that a life measured only in achievements and acquisitions is ultimately empty. She nodded slowly, as if this painful truth was one she had somehow always known. And you? What do you think of me? I reached for her hand, half expecting her to pull away. She didn't. I think you are your father's daughter, I said carefully. Brilliant, driven, capable of extraordinary things. But I also see glimpses of something else in you, something that has been awakening these past weeks. Compassion. Reflection. A desire for meaning beyond success. The month is almost up, she said after a long silence. Our agreement. Yes. You promised to give me control of the company if I proved myself worthy. I studied my daughter's face, trying to read what lay behind her carefully composed expression. Do you believe you've done that? To my surprise, she laughed. A short, sad sound with no humor in it. A month ago, I would have said yes without hesitation. I would have listed my qualifications, my achievements, the deals I've secured. She shook her head. Now I'm not so sure what worthy even means anymore. We sat in silence as the evening light faded around us, the garden filling with shadows. A month ago, I couldn't have imagined this moment. This genuine connection. This honest conversation with the daughter who had spent decades dismissing me. I don't want to fight you anymore, Isabella finally said. About the will, about the company, about Dad. She turned to face me fully. But I don't know where that leaves us. I squeezed her hand gently. Perhaps we start over. Not as adversaries, not as CEO and shareholder, but as two women who both loved Richard Wilson and are trying to honor his memory in the best way we can. The next day, Mr. Peterson arrived at the house with the paperwork that would formally end our agreement. Isabella had requested his presence, though she hadn't told me why. We sat in Richard's study, the three of us, surrounded by the books and photographs that had defined his life. I've made a decision, Isabella announced, her voice steady. I'm withdrawing my challenge to the will. Mr. Peterson looked surprised but pleased. I think that's a wise choice, Miss Wilson. Additionally, she continued, I'd like to propose a new arrangement. She slid a folder across the desk to me. I've drafted this myself. It's a structure for how we might move forward with the company. I opened the folder, scanning the document inside. It outlined a plan where I would retain ownership and final decision-making authority, but Isabella would serve as CEO, with clear guidelines about the company's charitable initiatives and ethical investment policies. You'd be the moral compass, she explained, watching my face carefully. I'd handle the day-to-day operations. Together, we'd build something that honors Dad's full legacy. Not just his business acumen, but his commitment to giving back. I looked up at my daughter, seeing her clearly perhaps for the first time in years. Not as the entitled child who had dismissed me, not as the adversary who had tried to take what Richard had left me, but as a woman at a crossroads, offering a bridge instead of a battle. What about James? I asked. He was quite adamant about challenging the will. A shadow crossed Isabella's face. James and I are reevaluating our relationship. He doesn't understand the changes I'm trying to make. She straightened her shoulders. But that's my problem, not yours. Mr. Peterson cleared his throat. This is quite a departure from your position a month ago, Miss Wilson. Isabella's eyes remained on mine. A lot can change in a month when you're finally paying attention to the right things. Later that evening, after Mr. Peterson had left with a new agreement for his team to formalize, Isabella and I stood in the kitchen, preparing dinner together, something we had never done before this month. I found something else in Dad's desk, she said, reaching into her pocket. This was tucked inside a copy of his favorite book. She handed me a small, worn photograph, Richard and me on our wedding day, young and radiant with hope, his arm around my waist, my head on his shoulder. He kept this with him at the office, Isabella said softly. All those years. I traced the edge of the faded photograph, remembering that day. That feeling of absolute certainty that we would face whatever came next together. Your father wasn't perfect, I said. But he always found his way back to what mattered. Isabella nodded, her eyes suspiciously bright. I think I'm finally beginning to understand what he was trying to teach me. What you've been showing me this past month. She turned back to the vegetables she was chopping, but not before I caught the glimmer of tears on her lashes. I can't promise I'll get it right all at once, she continued, her voice steady despite the emotion. I've spent a long time being the person Dad originally shaped me to be. Ambitious, competitive, focused on success at any cost. Change takes time, I assured her. And awareness is the first step. We worked in companionable silence for a few minutes, the rhythm of our cooking a simple harmony that would have seemed impossible just weeks ago. Thank you, Isabella said suddenly, setting down her knife, for not giving up on me, for giving me this chance even when I was difficult. The word was such an understatement that I couldn't help but smile. You're my daughter, Isabella. And you're Richard's daughter too. Not just the driven businessman, but the man who read stories to dying children and kept our wedding photo on his desk for 47 years. She smiled back, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. I'd like to get to know that man better. And, she added hesitantly, I'd like to get to know you better too, Mom. Mom. She hadn't called me that in years, preferring the more distant mother, or simply addressing me indirectly. The word hung in the air between us, a small but significant bridge across the chasm that had separated us for so long. As we set the table together, I felt Richard's presence around us. Not as a ghost but as a legacy of love that had finally found its way home. The battle was over. The healing had begun. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt truly free.